Hello everybody and welcome to the United Stand. I'm very sure that this topic today is going to go down very well. Is it the end of McTominay and McFred at Manchester United under Erik ten Hag? Well, it better be. It has to be, because I want to go along with anything Erik ten Hag wants to do as a United manager. Whether it's signing a player I'm not sure about or picking a player I'm not sure about, you've got to give him that backing as a manager. But if he started this season saying, I want to build my team around a McTominay and Fred midfield, then I'm sorry, Erik, that's very much like saying, I want to cross the North Pole in a pair of Speedos. You're going to die out there. It's not going to work, and your career's going to die if you try and do that with McTominay and Fred, because Erik ten Hag is a far better coach than any of us, but he hasn't been watching Manchester United in depth like we have for the last few years, and those two players as a pair just cannot work. There might be a future for one of them, which I'll talk about in a minute, but look, when you look at the way Erik ten Hag wants to play football, he does want to dominate, he does want to dictate, and he wants to play high up the pitch. And to do that, you've got to have a midfield pivot that is good on the ball, that is clever on the ball, that reads the game, that is energetic, tenacious, and talented. And unfortunately, those descriptions don't naturally come to mind when you're thinking about McTominay and Fred. They don't pick up the runners. They're actually not that good in 50-50 duels, and their passing is dreadful. That is why, for the last season, we got dominated by most teams we played. So it has to be the end of McTominay and Fred. As I said, there may be one of them that survives. We'll talk about that in a minute. But a few things I want to talk about before I talk about why I don't think, how I think Erik ten Hag will use them and why he won't use them as a pair. I saw something, I think it was based up until the end of February or March, and it was on the top 10 players who'd covered the most distance in the Premier League up until the end of February or March. And in the top 10, you had a midfield pivot of Soucek and Rice. I think the Brentford midfield was there, and Romu was there for Southampton. So in the top 10, you've got 3 or 4 midfielders who play where McTominay and Fred are. They're not there. I mean, one thing you would hope is that they can't pass. They're not very good at tackling, but you'd want them to be running around a lot, and they don't really. They don't really cover a lot of distance either. In relation to passing, this is really important. Ranking everybody who's played in the midfield in the Premier League this season for passes per 90, Fred's 25th and Scott McTominay's 62nd. They have played a lot of games for Manchester United, this midfield has this season, and you can spend a lot of time going, well, you know, this reason, that reason, but they've both played a lot of games, and they're not even in the top 20 for passes per 90 in a Manchester United shirt. And when you think of Manchester United, you think of attacking football, dominating football, dictating football, exactly what Erik ten Hag wants to do. And our midfielders have shamefully failed to get on the ball. Now, people say McTominay goes and hides. People say Fred can't control it, so how can he pass it? But to not be in the top 20, not to have one player in the top 20 for passes per 90 for Manchester United, considering 20, that's 10 teams, both midfielders. If teams are playing with 2 midfielders, that's 10 teams. We can't get one. And McTominay being 62nd, that's abysmal, considering he's been our main holding midfielder. So, look, Erik ten Hag's going to look at things like that. Of course he is, and he's going to see it. McTominay is in the top 10 for something. That's fouls per 90, which we know he has a problem with. So that's another negative that you don't want in your team. But interestingly, defensive duels per 90. So defensive duels are where, you know, you're going in for a tackle when somebody else has got the ball. Offensive duel is when you've got the ball and you have to hold them off. Defensive duel is when someone else has got the ball and you're trying to get them. This is what you want your midfield to be good at. Fred's actually 14th in that, but McTominay is 44, which is less than Thiago, less than Joel Linton. So, funnily enough though, McTominay wins more of his defensive duels, even though he doesn't have as many. But just to give you a little example here, McTominay and Fred, McTominay wins about 54% of his defensive duels. Fred wins around 50%. Bissouma and Kante are at 66%. Fernandinho and Didi McGinn are at 62%. So they're not winning anywhere near enough. And that brings it back, really. We've got... Anybody could watch Manchester United this season and see that we are just not good enough in the midfield. I know that Maguire and centre-backs have had issues. I know people have spoken about Rashford and other players. not performing, and the fullbacks like Wan-Bissaka and Shaw and others. But midfield is where the game is won and lost, and we put up a massive white flag this season. And it started with Solskjaer not buying a midfielder last summer, and that's why this summer we've got to buy, I believe, 2 midfielders. And I think it's absolutely essential that Erik ten Hag does that as well, because if he doesn't, Matic is gone, and Matic is probably legs gone anyway. But you cannot build anything on that sort of foundation. You can have the best tools, you can be building a palace, but if you build it on wood, and I'm talking like wafer thin wood here, in fact, build it on breadsticks, it's going to snap. And that's basically what McTominay and Fred as a pair have provided. The joke was always that McTominay and Fred are McFred, because if you put them together, you get one half-decent midfielder. I don't think you even get that. You certainly can't have 2 of them playing together. So, look, what their future is at Manchester United, we'll talk about in a moment. But Erik ten Hag is going to want a player that is in the top 10 for passes per 90, is in the top 10 for defensive duels won, and is in the top 10 for distance covered. And these 2 players fail miserably on all 3 of those areas. And there's a lot more to that than being a midfielder. But you want your midfielder on the ball. You want them passing the ball a lot like Rodri. You want them winning a lot of defensive duels like an Ndidi or a Kante. And you want them to be able to cover a lot of distance, because ultimately, if they're covering a lot of distance, they're working hard. And we've not done that. And they failed. And it surprises me that they failed on those areas in some ways, because they were known as the Duracell bunnies. The players that Ollie could count on to just chuck in the midfield, and they might be a bit limited, but they're full of the passion. And that has fell away as well. As footballers, they've just not been good enough this season. But the one I think that could be good enough is Fred, because whilst he's not in the top 20 for any of these things that we're talking about, he's not actually that far off. And I do believe that Fred is a player that I could see Erik ten Hag maybe not starting the season with, but I certainly think with coaching, and it sounds silly to say coaching at 29 for Fred and 25 for McTominay, but I think Fred could be a useful player for Erik ten Hag in the last 20 minutes of a game, or in a Europa League tie and things like that. I don't think he's anywhere near good enough for us to even stabilise next season. I certainly don't think you can play De Jong and Fred. We might have to do that, but I don't... Honestly, I'm almost tempted to say I think it's the end of McTominay and Fred and not the end of McFred, because McFred is playing McTominay and Fred together. I struggle to see how you can play one of them, even if you get a Declan Rice or a De Jong or a Calvin Phillips or a Ruben Neves. I just still think that when you look at what we've spoken about there, how low their pass ability is, how low their ability to win defensive duels are, even if you stick them next to somebody that's good, it's still a weakness. And I just don't think that that's the way that Ten Hag's going to go. I personally think that this manager will absolutely look at 2 areas to massively improve this team. He wants that defensive line high, so he wants a centre-back who can do that. But he'll want his midfield, and it will be a pair, to have the ability to say, give me the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball. I'm driving the press, I'm driving the press. And look, whatever you think about McTominay and Fred, they don't have the authority or confidence to stand in the midfield, take the ball, run the game, make the tackle, run around a lot, and also run the press. You know, that, I mean, one thing about De Jong, you can talk about his strengths and his weaknesses, but he's 100% drilled in how to run a team and how to dictate the play and dictate the press. And I don't think those 2 players have it. So look, I believe both players will be here at Manchester United next season, but I do believe this is, gladly, maybe sadly for some, the end of McFred. I cannot see, I mean, maybe they'll get a Carabao Cup game, maybe they'll get a Europa League game. I'll be stunned if we see one Premier League game where they start, unless we get an injury crisis. I think this is the area where we're going to see the most amount of change, and I think this is the area where he needs 2 midfielders, which makes it very interesting, because who is the midfielder we're bringing in, let alone 2? Personally, I'd love to see a Lema, a De Jong. I think we'd see a different Man United, but I think this is where Ten Hag takes us away from the last few years into a new dawn, when you look at United's midfield and you see something very different to what we've done for years. I think it will be the end of them. Anyway, make sure you smash a like and subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. And, of course, give your comments below. Who would you like to see as your midfield two? Is there a future for McTominay or Fred at Manchester United?